Good afternoon, everyone. This is Noreen Kelly and Helen Moore from McGuireWoods. We're excited to be here. We are going to give it one more minute for folks to join. It looks like people are popping on, so we'll get started around about 1 minute, 1 or 2 minutes past the hour.
Hello, everyone.
All right, it being 4:01, it looks like we've got some critical mass. So again, for those who just came on, my name is Noreen Kelly. I'm the managing partner of the New York office of McGuireWoods. I'm on with my friend and colleague, Helen Moore. Helen and I have spent a lot of time thinking about and solving problems related to CAT, or the Consolidated Audit Trail, and its ongoing implementation. And so we wanted to spend some time today going over with you in the CLE what we think are topics that are specific enough to be helpful, hopefully, but broad enough that we're not getting too far into the weeds, which you can easily do with the CAT. So just broadly, what we're going to cover today is what is the CAT at a high level for folks that haven't had the pleasure, and some who have. The birth of the CAT, if y'all have known anything about that, it's been a project that's gone on many, many years, almost more than a decade. So we'll talk a little bit about that, how it's the implementation timelines are going, what they look like, what's been implemented so far, and what's to come. And then moving to what I think is really the most interesting thing is what the CAT adds to surveillance and supervision, both for regulators and other market participants. We'll talk about what's in it for you all as largely folks at broker-dealers. That's unfortunately a very short section. And some implications for tech governance, which is one of our sort of themes of the moment. So getting started on what is the CAT. So the CAT is, broadly speaking, is an SEC commissioned data system that once it's fully implemented will give the regulators of the SEC, FINRA, and other SROs really a 360-degree view of equity and option transactions from the order receipt and origination time through modifications, cancellations, the routing, executions, and ultimately even allocations to specific customers and specific accounts. And the submission of the data is coming from both the exchanges that are participants, and we'll get into more of the details on this, as well as SRO member firms. So it's really an enormous amount of data. It applies to all U.S. exchanges and all SRO member firms, including ATSs. It will include all NMS stocks, listed options, and over-the-counter equity securities. And the plan processor, which is FINRA, and Helen will talk a little bit about how they got there, has the task of taking all of this data and linking it together from order receipt through execution through allocation, and assigning it a CAT-generated order ID so that regulators can look across exchanges, across customers, and across markets to see different types of linked trading activity. The CAT, one of the key features of the CAT is that transactions ultimately, and we'll talk a little bit about the implementation timeline, will be able to be linked by trading accounts and through something called an FDID, and also ultimately by customers through something called a CCID, which is really a key and new feature for this data repository. And one way to think about the trading account are accounts for which the order at issue was placed, whereas customers are obviously either two-legged customers or institutional customers, and this is a many-to-many relationship. So there can be many customer owners of a particular trading account, and there could be many customers could own many trading accounts. So both of those, the matrix of those two identifiers will give regulators really a lot of power when they're looking at this data. To give you a little bit of more of a visual couple of visual aids that came from something. Oh, I failed to mention one place we'll cover a lot here, but there's a lot to cover where the CAT is concerned. One great place if you need to dig in, is the catnmsplan.com has an enormous amount of information. So the CAT has voluminous technical specifications, which I'm sure you'll be glad to know we won't be talking too much about today. There are reporting scenarios if you have particular questions about how things should be reported and what data elements go with them. And also FAQs, instructionals, really a ton of helpful information, and frankly, in a format, in a way that I think is much more helpful than, for instance, guidance that's been out there forever on even OATS or Bluesheets. So definitely check that out if you have questions. So also a good resource is something we're citing here. ZIFMA has published a firm's guide to the CAT, which is very helpful. And what this diagram and the next are trying to visually show is exactly what kind of information and from whom the CAT will take in, absorb, and then link together. So you'll see here, market makers and others their quotes will be submitted to the CAT for all those securities that we talked about, the listed options, the NMS securities, and the OTC equities. All information related to orders, routes between broker-dealers and exchanges, information related to the executions, allocations, and then ultimately the client data. And this linkage that is demonstrated here in part is something that the plan administrator of FINRA will do using the standardized data elements that the different participants will send this data into the CAT. It will link together all of these events to provide what we talked about, that end-to-end life cycle. Another sort of visual here, just broadly speaking, so the information that's coming in on the left is coming from SROs, from industry members or agents reporting on their behalf of the quotes, routes, trades, and allocations. They go into the CAT repository. There's a system of reference data, which are things like the client identifiers and such. And as the plan processor, FINRA is linking all that together for use by all the regulators. So OATS CAT is often talked about as sort of OATS 2.0. I think it's like OATS 7.0 though. It's really a lot. It's a lot different than. There are many differences between CAT and OATS. It's a much stronger, much more interesting data set. But this is a nice list of some of the ways that the CAT is, some of the material ways in which the CAT is different. So for instance, in OATS, option events were not included. The listed option events will be included with CAT. That is obviously an enormous amount of new information for regulators that can be cross-sected against, for instance, equity trades and similar underliers and that sort of thing across market participants. So that's an interesting new add. The OATS did not require market maker proprietary orders. That is going to be a feature of CAT. Obviously, as we said, the customer and account information, not in OATS, will be required for CAT. It provides, an enormous layer in this matrix for regulators to use and to scrutinize with. There were also in OATS exemptions for certain types of manual orders and certain types of smaller, largely broker-dealers. Those exemptions are gone now in CAT. And then obviously, like we've mentioned, the allocations which doesn't come we'll talk about the phases, it's sort of a bit down the line, but for equities and options, but is going to provide an enormous amount of new information. And I'll turn over to you, Helen, to talk a little bit about the governance structure.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So as Noreen mentioned, the CAT is both a database and then a set of rules governing the database. So here we just wanted to have a word about the CAT governance structure and the rules. And basically, the rules are in a hierarchy structure. I think of it sort of like a waterfall. At the top is Exchange Act Rule 613, which is a part of Reg NMS. And it was proposed in 2010 and passed in 2012. And what it does is it mandates that the SROs get together and form what is called a CAT NMS plan. And Rule 613 also has requirements, kind of broad level requirements for the CAT in terms of what it's supposed to cover, how it's supposed to be linked, and the broad outlines of the roles that the SROs are to play. So that's at the top, and kind of the next level down then is the CAT NMS plan, and the SROs proposed that shortly after Exchange Act Rule 613 was finalized, but then it got approved finally in 2016. And what it provides for is it forms the CAT LLC, Consolidated Audit Trail LLC, which is an LLC in which all the exchanges in FINRA are members of. And it provides for a high-level governance of the CAT in terms of operations. It creates the CAT Operating Committee, and it also provides for the selection of the CAT plan processor, and it provides that the SROs all have obligations to use the CAT data once it's live in their existing surveillance systems, or to build out surveillance systems for it. And a little word about lingo here. As we know, the SROs are all the exchanges in the U.S., equities and options, as well as FINRA. And then participants are meaning the CAT NMS plan participants, and that lingo is referred to in the rules a lot, and that means the SROs and FINRA when we see that rule. And then lastly, industry member, which is also sometimes referred to as reporting member, refers to generally the broker dealers or entities that have data on transactions that they're obligated to report to the CAT. So moving right along here. So we mentioned the plan processor in the previous slide. FINRA was chosen as the plan processor, and in order to discharge that duty, FINRA created a subsidiary, and it's called FINRA CAT LLC. And FINRA delegated duties to that subsidiary, and the five duties in this slide are duties that FINRA has delegated to FINRA CAT LLC. And they are to manage and operate the CAT, as you can see here, and to ensure that the consolidation, meaning the linkage that's done behind the scenes of the data in the CAT, is done accurately, and to operate the CAT. And CAT LLC, FINRA CAT LLC is run by Shelley Bolin, who's the president and COO. She was the OATS guru at FINRA for many years, and this is a natural role for her. And she knows everything in the world there is to know about the CAT, and it's been great in terms of setting up the help desk and providing webinars, and has just been a great leader on the plan processor. And then finally, just recently, the SROs have gotten together. I'll move my slide here. Oh, oops, no, moved too far. The SROs have gotten together and formed a 17D2 agreement. And I'm going to move it there. And that is described in FINRA Reg Notice 2020. And what is 17D2 agreement, if there are any of you who aren't familiar with it? It's a plan whereby the SROs get together and allocate responsibility for regulating, for either enforcement, investigation, or surveillance activity of firms that are members of more than one of the SROs. So in this instance, there are firms that are members of, say, FINRA and the New York Stock Exchange. So in order to avoid duplication, it wouldn't make sense for both FINRA and the New York Stock Exchange to examine the firm or to do any investigations. The SROs have gotten together and divvied up responsibilities. So the way they've divvied it up ends up having FINRA do all of the regulation, because the way they've divided it, if a firm is a member of FINRA and one other SRO, then FINRA will take that the obligation to examine and surveil and investigate the CAT rules for those member firms. And then if a firm is a member of another SRO but not FINRA, FINRA has entered into RSAs, that's regulatory service agreements, with those firms, whereby they have are with those SROs, whereby FINRA will do the regulation for those SROs. So what that ends up meaning is that FINRA is doing all of the CAT compliance rules in terms of the surveillance and enforcement and investigations. Yeah, so that's it. I'll advance that on then, Noreen.
All right, thanks, Helen. So we're going to talk a little bit, having given you a very quick overview of what the CAT is, and if any of you have been involved in the process of its getting stood up at your firms, you know it's an enormous project. It's really, for the firms and for the exchanges and for FINRA. We wanted to pause for a minute and say, you know, what's the purpose of this? And we'll dig in a little bit to talk about how it came about, and then also Helen will talk a little bit about how we anticipate it being used based on what regulators have said, and also just based on the nature of the beast. So the purpose of the CAT is many. Principally, though, there are three main objectives. One, obviously, market surveillance. So the Consolidated Audit Trail is going to give, it's like the SROs working with gas. I mean, they will be able to see, once it's completely stood up, which is a couple of years away, transactions and trends and patterns in a way that's really, I won't say impossible, but almost impossible or challenging, at least at the level that they will be able to see and detect it. So the detection of fraud, manipulation, market misconduct is an obvious first use. But also, and this comes from something of its birth, the market reconstruction. So the extent to which the SEC or other exchanges need to reconstruct an unusual events, like, and we'll talk in a minute how this came about, like in the flash crash, but to reconstruct the unusual market activity or volatility, the CAT will provide enormous data for that to happen, and to happen quickly. And then also, you know, the SEC noted, and this is from their release, that they believe that their rulemaking and policy decisions will be more informed because they'll have a better view into market activity. So a little bit about how it came about. So the flash crash, I would say, is a place where it was cemented. The concept of the audit trail, or developing a consolidated audit trail, predated the flash crash of 2010, but it was the need to reconstruct what happened that day and the SEC frustration in being able to do that really cemented the need. So actually, about 12 days later after the crash, the SEC published this preliminary findings regarding the market event, trying to determine the causality. And one of the focuses is that, as we highlighted here in this quote, was that they were frustrated, or their ability to really see the cause was frustrated by the fact that the data that they, first of all, had to compile, ask other people for, right? Ask exchanges for, ask market participants for, and then compile, organize, and piece together really was incredibly frustrating. And they note in the last sentence there that, for instance, every exchange has established its own requirements for what constituted an audit trail, including what items are captured, how they're named, and the structure of the data file. So the fact that different exchanges had different audit trails, that they all had different structures in terms of how the data was organized, meant that they just you couldn't jigsaw puzzle them together in a really efficient way. And so that was May 18th, 2000, and also the then existing and now existing fragmentation of the market really then, frustrated the ability to surveil and to do that reconstruction. So about not a few days later, the SEC formally proposed the CAT through Reg NMS Rule 613, and since then it's been 10 years really in the making. This is a brief timeline of some of the major events in the last 10 years of trying to get the CAT essentially stood up. It was proposed in 2010. The rule was adopted in 2012. But it wasn't until November of 2016 that the SEC approved the CAT-MS plan, and it's been effectively 4 years since then that it's taken before the first go-live event where the industry members are actually reporting. The exchanges have hooked up earlier, but it was June 22nd, 2020 that was the first sort of go-live or implementation date for firms. So it's been 10 years in the making. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time on the implementation timelines, which also show a little bit more about the depth of the CAT and exactly when all this will be released. So for those of you who've had the pleasure, that on June 22nd of this year, the phase 2A began, and the two phases are largely the industry member reporting. Phase 1 related mostly to the exchange hookup. So the biggest impact, or the best way to think about phase 2A was basically equities reporting, simple equities reporting went live as of June 22nd. So this list goes into a lot of detail. We'll have this available for you all as a reference, but effectively what gets produced are everything that was in OATS and then some of the other layers of equity transactions that are now required in the CAT that weren't in the OATS, including the proprietary orders and the linkage to the firm designated IDs, which are trading accounts. Phase 2B, which was just a few days ago on July 20th, are simple option orders. So not all option orders, so just the simple options came live, but that was, again, a big add to the CAT. It was not in OATS at all, so that's live, that's 2B. The upcoming phases, phase 2C, which will be in April of 2021, the big takeaway here is that this is the first time the allocations for equities goes live. So that will be with respect to FDID. So that's tying equities trades back to trading accounts once they're allocated. So that's going to be a big change in 2C in April of next year. And then in 2D, which is not until December 13th of 2021, the big takeaway there is that that's when the sort of complex options and option allocation goes live, which again will produce, just again, an enormous layer of data for the SEC and FINRA to have. And finally, phase 2E, which I think is both somewhat the most interesting and the most controversial, is not until July 2022, but it's the addition of the customer information, which Helen's going to spend a few minutes on and talk through exactly what that's going to mean.
Sure. So this, and as Noreen said earlier, this is a big addition to the big part of the CAT in terms of how it's different from what has gone before, is that it'll actually have customer and more granular account information in it. And basically, each of these phases has three kind of big dates. One is the tech spec publication date, which just happened a week ago or two with this phase, and then the testing date. And the testing date will be January of 2022 for this phase, and then it'll go live in July of 2022. And so as far as customer and account information, one big thing to remember about the CAT structure is that those are two different concepts. And Noreen hit that earlier. It's a many-to-many relationship. One customer can have more than one account, and one account can have more than one customer attached to it if there are more than one person who can trade on that account. So there was controversy, and you guys might be familiar with this because of the data security issues. The customer, in Reg NMS Rule 613, initially proposed to have social security numbers in the CAT. And the industry members, including SIFMA and the plan participants, were concerned about data breaches. And so what they proposed and what has now been accepted and built into the CAT is that to make the CAT more secure, instead of social security numbers going as part of the customer data to the CAT, firms are going to have, there's going to be a two-step process whereby firms are going to first submit a transformed social security number to the CAT, and then on the back end, the CAT is going to transform it again into a number that the CAT keeps private and will not even give it back out to the firm who submitted the original transformed social security number. And then the other thing is the CAT is going to store that customer data with those transformed numbers in a different database than the event database. The event database is where all the orders and trades and routes, all the order events are stored, and the customer and account information will be in a different database that will be used as reference, but it'll be stored separately. So basically what ends up happening is that, as a requirement, is that these fields that we've listed here, the name, address, and only the year of birth, not the date of birth, and then the transformed individual taxpayer identification number, and then the individual's role in the account, whether they're a primary holder, et cetera, is what's going to be transmitted as customer data to the CAT. And then as far as accounts, we've mentioned a number of times firm designated ID, and these other fields here are what's going to be transmitted. Examples of customers could be individual investors, institutions, third-party money managers, or individuals or entities with trading authority over accounts. All of those are going to have customer IDs and be in the customer reference data. And then we just wanted to mention briefly some recent news that you might have heard about the CAT, and one of them is what I was just referring to. That's the second bullet here. The industry did get together and go to the SEC and ask for exemptive relief on not providing social security numbers, and they were provided with that relief. Another recent item in the news pertains to the CAT reporter agreements. And basically, reporter agreements are signed by the CAT reporters, and they're the industry members or reporting members, and they are signed in order to gain access to the CAT database for purposes of reporting. And the agreements provide for things like what are the obligations of the reporters and limitations on use of the system. And one thing that they had in there was that a limitation of liability for the SROs if in case of CAT data breaches, and so what the industry had argued about was that the broker dealers don't have any control over whether there's a data breach or not, and that they should not be liable for any data breaches, and that there shouldn't be limitation of liability and on the SROs. And so that provision has been removed. And then finally, it's not here because it's very recent, but we just thought we would mention there's been a recent request for exemptive relief, and it's a letter to the SEC from plan participants, the SROs, and it requests exemption from the NMS plan for reporting on certain verbal activity on and off the floors of the exchange. So for example, in the open outcry on the floor of the exchange, if a floor broker makes a firm order, then that, because it's a firm order, it's covered as an order in the CAT rules and has to be reported, even though it was done verbally in open outcry, which makes it difficult to track in terms of time and difficult to tell whether it's actually firm versus an indication of interest or a request for a quote. So there's been a request for exemption that's just been submitted. And same with upstairs, meaning non-floor verbal orders over phones or chat entities, or like the Bloomberg chat. So that we'll keep an eye on that. Okay, and then I'll move that along there. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Helen. So we were going to now talk in more detail about exactly what the CAT will add with respect to market surveillance and trading supervision, both within firms and by the SROs. This next slide is a summary of a helpful interview that was given by Tom Gira, who I know many of you know was unfortunately passed away recently, very sadly, but was the FINRA executive who led market reg for many years and was really instrumental in the development of the CAT and gave a lot of thought about and public thought about exactly how it might be used and used well by regulators. One of the things that he pointed out in this 2018 interview was that at FINRA, about 90% of the cross-market alerts that they received from their existing surveillance for market manipulation involved activity on more than one exchange, and that 70% of the alerts involved activity from more than one broker-dealer. And the significance of that is that that sort of activity where people are manipulating, or there's misconduct through multiple broker-dealers or on different exchanges or through different accounts, the ability to link that and see it, at least through the data alone, is enormously challenging given the types of surveillance and reports that FINRA and the SEC and other exchanges can acquire either on their own or from each other, and then jigsaw it together, as much as the SEC found when they tried to reconstruct the flash crash, which of course was a larger issue. But the CAT, given that it's given far more granular data and that it will be linked across exchanges and across customers and trading accounts and traders and broker-dealers, will really provide like a view in that will be extremely powerful. And they also foreshadow the use, pairing that data and that enormously powerful database with modern cloud computing and even artificial intelligence and machine learning to start detecting manipulation and trading patterns, maybe by humans or algorithms or others, that wouldn't be seen or detected as easily with current technology. The other, obviously we've talked a little bit about the more comprehensive options data that can be layered in to look at cross-product surveillance. And then for the SEC's purposes, for its part, we'll be able to run its own surveillance through the CAT without asking FINRA, the exchanges, or the other, the broker-dealers for Bluesheets and looking at OATS and all these other things to compare. They'll really be able to do their surveillance quickly and on their own, and not wait for all of that stuff to be received and integrated. So we want to do sort of a case study. Helen was going to walk through a couple of recent cases. These are obviously pre-CAT cases, but the facts of them, as she'll explain, sort of are the types of things that will be seen likely much quicker than certainly these were probably detected before. You want to start with Helen?
Will do. Yep. And so we picked these cases because they illustrate several important things that we're talking about today. One is, what kind of violative activity on the markets is CAT really where CAT will shine, where it'll really be helpful and add value. And another is in the FINRA and the SEC's response to these cases. What can that show us about what FINRA and the SEC are going to be thinking that firms are going to be needing to be doing in response to having the CAT data? So basically, these cases that we chose involve what we call, and you've heard of it a lot, possibly spoofing, layering, and wash sales. They're all forms of micro manipulation or trying to manipulate the market. And basically, what that is it involves trading activity, orders, quotes that are baiting others to move to a new price point. For example, the use of false quotes, orders, or trades on one side of the market that lure the market participants momentarily to a different price level, meaning to up their quote or to buy or sell at a higher or a lower price level than they ordinarily would have in response to the activity, in response to all these quotes that are fake that are put out there. For example, if it looks like there's a huge amount of sell orders, that might indicate to other market participants that there's selling activity so that the price is going to go down. So they may lower their price of their quotes or accept a trade at a lower price if they see a whole lot of sell orders out there. But if the sell orders are fake, then what these manipulators do is they'll flood the market, in this example, with sell orders, but they'll have a buy order on the other side of the market, so that the flooding of the market of the sell orders will cause quotes to momentarily be lowered in response, and then they'll buy these manipulators who flooded the market with sell orders will put in a, quote, real order to buy on the other side of the market and take advantage of that move in the price that they caused themselves. And so this, we go through this not to talk about manipulation, but to talk about how this is the kind of thing that CAT is really well designed to find that in ways that the previous surveillances weren't. Because, as Noreen just said, CAT has data at the account level across broker-dealers and across products, and so that a manipulator who's trying to avoid detection is going to try and use multiple broker-dealers, different products, and maybe even different types of products. Maybe they'll manipulate the equities market to advantage an order that they have in the options market. As you know, equities and options, they trade, equity prices are a component of options prices. So because the CAT cuts across all that, and because it has uniform accounts so that a regulator can see if a manipulator is doing some activity on the CBOE and some activity on the New York Stock Exchange that's related. It used to be that it would be more difficult for the regulator to see that, but now the regulators with the CAT are going to be able to see that. So we just thought we would show, for example, this LEC case is a case in which there was the LEC Securities and Samuel LEC, who has been permanently barred as a result of this case, where they had accounts that they were giving market access to, and those accounts were of traders overseas who were manipulating the market with layering and spoofing, so and cross-market manipulation, which is just what I talked about a minute ago, micro manipulation. And what we've underlined here is their effort to avoid detection. They had an account at LEC and were doing the activity there, but then they opened an account at another brokerage firm, or more than one, and started doing that that layering and cross-market manipulation activity on that through that other account at another broker-dealer, But when that broker-dealer started asking questions, they just closed that account and moved the trading back to LEC. So that's an example of trying to avoid the market or avoid detection. In this case, it was a whistleblower case. Their SEC did give a whistleblower award for this. One thing I would like to mention is, and as Noreen mentioned a minute ago, FINRA has had access to a lot of data across markets, because even before the CAT, FINRA has been having regulatory service agreements with a number of SROs, so that FINRA has been getting their data and been able to match it. It kind of similar to the CAT, only it's not down to the account level. It has a lot of problems that the CAT will solve. But so FINRA also has sophisticated surveillance even before the CAT, and whether FINRA caught this or not, I don't know. I do know there was a whistleblower. But when CAT comes in, CAT is going to be able to find this activity very well, very easily. And I'm going to talk in a minute about what happened to LEC and LEC Securities, but just I have one more example of sort of some fun facts on these manipulation cases. In this one, SEC versus Alexander Milrood, this one involved another micro manipulation trading scheme, and in this one, again, a whistleblower, and the FBI got involved, and the FBI, wearing a wire undercover, met this fraudster in a coffee shop and pretended to be a trader that wanted to get in on the scheme and do some of the manipulation and make some money off of it. And so the fraudster explained to the FBI agent how it worked and how the scheme worked. And what he said was, they use one account to do the, quote, dirty work, which, as I said, is flooding the market with quotes or orders in an attempt to move the market price. And then they have another account to do the, quote, clean work, which is anything but clean, but it is where he's got a real order that he's going to take advantage of the price movement that he just created. So we included this one because it's fun. And again, even though it was a whistleblower case, when CAT comes in, it's going to be able to catch some of this activity. And then here is back to the LEC case, because I want to talk here about what the regulators, how they responded. That case was bifurcated, and some of it went, the case against the actual owners of the accounts that were manipulating did go to trial in the Southern District of New York. But the case against LEC and LEC Securities, also there was a FINRA, multiple SROs and FINRA and SEC cases against LEC and LEC Securities. LEC, as I said, got a permanent bar, and LEC Securities had to pay a $1.5 million fine, I think, and also had to have a monitor. And, it'll never be the same probably. But importantly for us, what FINRA and the SEC said here was two things. One, they said LEC and LEC Securities were on notice. They had red flags of this violative activity. They could see that there was a whole bunch of quotes in a very short period of time, followed by a trade on the other side of the market. And right when the trade on the other side of the market went off, all those quotes were canceled. And so what SEC and FINRA said is that's a pattern, and that firm was on notice when they saw that pattern of trading that something was wrong, and they should have investigated, and they should have had pre-market controls under Rule 15C35 to prevent those kind of orders from being entered in the first place. And they said that the firm in many instances, for many patterns of manipulative activity, didn't have any automated surveillance. And then when it did, it had one for wash sales, but FINRA said their wash sales automated surveillance wasn't designed, it wouldn't have caught wash sales. And the firm didn't understand how to use it. And so importantly, FINRA charged rules violations of FINRA's supervision rules in addition to 15C35. And so what we're learning from this is that FINRA believes that if a firm has trading activity like this and didn't have surveillance that was sophisticated enough to catch it, or pre-market controls sophisticated enough to prevent it, or if firms were on notice of this kind of trading and didn't catch it, then they are going to be charged. And I think that is something that is important for us going forward as an important takeaway from firms. And we've kind of put some of it here, is that basically CAT hasn't gone live, or I mean, there haven't been any enforcement actions on the CAT. So while we don't know what the FINRA or the SEC are going to do, we have a guess. And what they might do is say, firms that are CAT reporting firms, you've got CAT information, you've got your CAT data. And if it has a pattern like this, you're going to be on notice that that's going to be a red flag possibly. And if you didn't notice it, even though you were submitting that data to the CAT and you had the ability to track it across customers and across market accounts, you are going to be deemed to have known about it. And so what we are suggesting is that firms might consider enhancing their automated surveillance or building it out in order to, incorporate the new features that CAT brings, the surveillance at the account level, surveillance across equity to option surveillance, and as well as surveillance of market makers trading activity, which is new with the CAT. Those are features of the CAT that might, firms might consider adding to enhancing their surveillance to take advantage of, or, in danger of being held to have a red flag if they don't. So I was just looking at my notes to see if I missed any great stuff. And also that, firms that don't have surveillance might be held just like in the LEC case to have that be a supervision violation. Okay, back to you, Noreen.
All right. So the message so far is a really complicated, we haven't mentioned, but expensive, somewhat exasperating project for firms and as well as for exchanges and for FINRA, but and that it may produce a lot of data that puts you on notice of bad conduct. So we might ask sort of what's in it for member firms. Unfortunately, as mentioned, a very short section. It will produce eventually the retirement, at least from the firm's perspective, OATS and Bluesheets. Not quite yet. They have to run in parallel until the regulators are convinced that the CAT has all of the power of the OATS and the Bluesheets, and that they can be retired and they're no longer needed. So that is one good upside. The other is that, and this is something that the SEC cited in its adopting release, is that the existence of the audit trail hopefully will provide you with much more informed regulators and informed exam staff, such that they can be more precise and not as duplicative and more efficient about requests and who should be examined and for what purpose. So the good news is that the exam information requests will probably be more informed and targeted, but that also may be the bad news, right? So on some level, there may be an efficiency that's gained from having a more informed regulator. There could also be a downside insofar as they're going to see activity that needs to be taken a look at probably a lot faster than they would have noticed before. So it is somewhat of a double-edged sword. We really do wish the section was longer, but alas, it isn't. Before we conclude, a couple things. One, we're going to talk a little bit about tech governance. I think I failed to mention at the beginning that for the purpose of CLE credit, I think everything is taken. There's no need for a code on this presentation. So if you haven't heard one and wonder why you haven't missed it, there doesn't need to be one. So all of that is taken care of. We also have a Q&A open if anybody has any questions, but if not, we'll talk about our last section, which is about tech governance and what that means for the CAT. So tech governance or technology control change management is something that we've thought a lot about in the last few years. Cases, so obviously the CAT is not live yet, and so there's no enforcement activity, but if we reflect it back on other systems that look like it, things like Bluesheets or OATS or LOPR or other non-financial regulatory reporting, there's certainly been a lot of enforcement activity, some fairly ticky-tack, but increasingly some that are producing fairly significant fine activity. And when we take a look at those cases, more often than not, they are described as issues or errors in reporting that are being produced by a failure in technology, a coding change that went awry, et cetera. And so a lot of that could be cleaned up usually if there's a good technology control change management program where changes in coding for these sorts of systems are done with an eye toward, with a regulatory lens of, what's the downstream impact if I change this timestamp from X to Y? Will that impact my OATS reporting, my trade reporting, and now my CAT reporting? So with CAT, the advent of CAT is such a complex system, and the fact that it's being stood up, and there'll be a lot of tinkering, I suppose, and as firms go live and learn how to implement it in the most, in the best way possible, and as guidance changes and FAQs get published, changes will be made to firms' infrastructure or CAT infrastructure, and if that's not done in a way that's careful, we're likely to see a lot of activity, that enforcement activity ultimately that looks a lot like the historic activity with OATS and Bluesheets, et cetera. Helen, do you want to say a word about that?
Not too much, just that FINRA also did publish something called RegTech paper about 2-3 years ago, and what made clear is exactly what Noreen just said, which is that regulatory technology, and the example here that's most relevant to this would be automated surveillance, just because we're talking about CAT data, but any kind of technology that has a regulatory component, for example, pre-trade controls. And it's talking about best practices and sort of what it's seeing in terms of how that kind of technology can be used in the future, and what is working and what is not working. And it talked a lot about governance and saying how plugging into an existing governance for existing systems, where you have it built out so that it's more formalized. The roles of compliance, the roles of legal are more formalized in the life cycle of the technology life cycle, in terms of building, tech specs to build a system, the data for a system, change management, that all of those are points where there's a role for compliance and surveillance, compliance and legal to be formalized, so that they could weigh in on whether a change is appropriate. and that they would have real, real authority. But so in the area of the CAT, that is, surveillance is one area where it would be, getting compliance and legal involved would be good in the life cycle of a system, be it a CAT system, but any kind of data system, order handling system, that's any system that has implications for regulations, 15C35 regulations, but books and records, reporting like OATS and CAT, any kind of system like that.
Excellent. Thanks, Helen.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, so that's the CAT, at least a broad overview of it. I hope you all took away something useful. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to Helen or I, either through the Q&A or separately. Again, if you have particular interest in specific reporting scenarios, definitely check out the catnmsplan.com website. There's a lot of really useful information. So with that, just want to thank all of you for your time on behalf of me and Helen and McGuireWoods, and we hope to see you all soon.
Thank you, everyone.